Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei becomes a dark dragon part 2. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video, and also go support the VanishMagic for writing that awesome fanfic. Let's start this video. Moments of silence passed as Issei waited for an answer. Noticing how frustrated the teen was still, he tried to change the atmosphere. Looking at the doctors and other hospital personnel, he said, "Leave us, we need to speak with him alone." While very much annoyed, the doctors obliged. The last one left addressing the mass. "If anything changes in his condition, we won't hesitate to enter." He then shut the door, leaving the three mass with a confused but mostly scared teen. "I first wanted to apologize for everything that has happened to you and wish that I could have known about you sooner," Issei said as he cleared the silence from the room. "Ah, shame on me, let me introduce myself and my companions. This is Ajuka Beelzebub." Before it occurred to him, Issei had jumped out of the bed and put his back to the opposing corner of the room from Ajuka. "I should have thought about how he might react." Issei mentally cursed Shalba for torturing this boy. He then thought about how to introduce Erafel, as her name would undoubtedly cause the same reaction. "If it wasn't for him, wouldn't have been able to rescue you," Issei said as he noticed Issei relaxed some, not enough to remove himself from the corner. Ajuka didn't know what to make of the situation. The boy's problem was in an area of science he wasn't familiar with. His analytical mind couldn't understand how someone could basically revert to their primal instincts, which was what he saw in this boy. He first saw fear, the fact that with every word spoken the boy visibly shivered as if the syllables were foreign to him, and analyzing deeper Ajuka saw his need to survive. Well, that was virtually gone. The fact he leaped to the corner, putting his back against the wall, was proof that it still existed to some degree. Knowing he could do nothing, he simply nodded his head in greeting and continued to look at the boy, just as the boy was focused on him. Issei paused as he looked over at his friend's stiff form. This was very unlike the Ajuka he knew, so he made a mental note to ask him later. "This is Erafel, she is Amayu, as is Ajuka and myself, speaking of which, my name is Issei's Lucifer." Upon hearing the name Lucifer, Issei dropped to his knees, placed his hands on the ground before Issei's, a deep bow on the floor, the ultimate show of submissiveness. Issei frowned as he looked over Issei, but it was Erafel who had the greatest reaction. She started to cry. It was barely audible, no louder than a whisper, but all three of the mass were saddened when they heard him say, "Master." Both Ajuka and Issei were shocked, for different reasons, but it was Erafel's reaction that truly surprised them. She leaped across the room, silent enough for Issei to not hear. He noticed her when she lifted him off the ground and pulled him into a tight embrace, softly crying into his shoulder. It was now Issei's turn to be shocked. Here was a woman who he had never met, who was superior to him, and she was hugging him, even crying on him. His mind was burning for answers. He thought he had done everything right. He stayed away from them. He bowed. He had followed everything he had been taught, yet she was hugging him. None of it made any sense. "Relax." Issei paused as he was just about to wrap his arms around the woman. He looked up above Erafel in the direction of Issei and Ajuka to see who spoke. "You won't find me out there, partner." Issei broke from Erafel's arms, then looked around the room a moment before setting his gaze on the floor, an attempt to focus his thoughts. In his frenzied panic, he failed to notice the hurt he caused Erafel until that look changed to one of curiosity. "Who's there?" Issei thought as he probed his consciousness, looking for any sign of the voice inside his head. "Since we are finishing up introductions, allow me to introduce myself. I am the Welsh Dragon Emperor, the dragon that stole the principle of domination from God. I am Drake." Issei visibly flinched as his thought singed with red flames Drake had released, giving his introduction some dramatic flair. "I first want to say how sorry I am," Drake began as he exchanged his roaring voice to a much somber tone. "I sat and watched as you were ... He paused as he knew there was no allotment of words that would amount to the loss his partner had suffered. Drake recomposed himself and finished with, "I have never been so powerless in my existence." What little remained of Issei's mind frantically trying to piece together everything that had transpired before him. There was a dragon in his head talking about the past, three people in front of him in the present that he couldn't understand. ... This led him to think about the future. What does this entail? He thought as everything now seemed so foreign until he felt something familiar, something that was always present, fear. For a second everything seemed to quiet down, his thoughts dispersed as he mentally curled into a ball, shielding himself from the rest of his thoughts. But for a second he felt something he thought he lost, a feeling he buried with his humanity, anger. Moments before, the three mass backed away from Issei and just looked at him. Now it was not just Ajuka studying him with analytical eyes. The three of them, along with a handful of doctors who peered in through the window, were all looking at Issei's still body. Issei noticed the boy's eyes twitched as if confused, then felt the room's temperature drop. What followed was the immense amount of pressure that caught the mouse off guard. However, as suddenly it had started, the room was back to normal, and Issei was still staring at the floor, concentrating on something that was beyond what they could see. They can't hear me, Drake said as he attempted to distract the boy from his bombardment of thoughts, unless I want them to. Issei, still not used to having someone speaking inside his head, was paralyzed in both his physical position and in his mind. There were people staring at him on both the outside and inside. This frightened him greatly. Trying to find some reason in all of this, Issei did what he always did, he lied to himself. I'm starting to create voices in my head, Issei concluded as he tried to cling to the one section of his sanity he thought the pain hadn't reached, his mindscape. I am not a figure of your imagination, Drake said as he was finding it increasingly frustrating to reason with his host. Here, let me prove it to you. Then, there was nothing. Issei was pulled from his mind as Isseixharem gently shook him. Hey, are you alright? Isseixharem asked, looking for any sign of acknowledgement. You haven't said a word since you woke up. Isseixharem paused as he felt a low hum of power enter the room, though this was different than the surge they felt before, that was born of rage and was uncontrollable. This felt old, restrained, but most definitely dangerous. Isseixharem looked at his fellow mass, seeing if they felt the curious new pressure that seemed to pour from the boy and fill the room. As he took a step back from Issei, he noticed a dull green light centered on the boy's left hand. No, it can't be, Isseixharem thought as he took a step closer and was suddenly blinded by a red light. Are you convinced now? Issei refocused his eyes, and his sight was pulled to a deep red gauntlet that covered his hand and a good portion of his forearm. As he was looking over the gauntlet, he paused as he looked at the alluring green gem, and it hit him. He had a dragon inside him. His mind was shattered, he couldn't put together words to answer the dragon's question, or even formulate a question as to why he was here. Calm down, or you're going to hyperventilate. Issei looked up to see the face of a very concerned doctor, waiting for him to calm down. He hadn't even realized the doctor had entered the room or the fact that he was breathing this roughly. Just breathe slowly, the doctor said in as soothing tone as possible. He didn't want to spook the boy. That's it, breath in. Those were the last words Issei heard as he took one look at his armor-encrusted hand and fainted. The doctors closest to Issei rushed to his unconscious body, wondering what all had happened to the teen in the time they had been out of the room. Is he alright? Peeped a concerned Serafal as she edged closer to the mass of personnel surrounding the collapsed boy. Pushing Serafal back, the doctor nodded to the two nurses standing in the doorway, then turned and faced the three mass. He is fine, he simply fainted. While Isseixharem and Ajuka could tell this for themselves, both released breath they hadn't realized they were holding. Serafal, on the other hand, was now all smiles and twirled around in excitement. Oh, that's absolutely wonderful. After removing the shock from his face at Serafal's action, the doctor turned to Isseixharem with a scowl clear across his face. What caused him to faint is something you could enlighten us on, as he motioned to the other doctors who were helping Issei back into the hospital bed. Ajuka and Isseixharem looked at each other, not seeing a reason to lie to the doctors any longer, and told them what they knew of the boy, which wasn't much. So you're telling me that this boy has been through hell, has 8 powerful evil pieces, as well as a sacred gear. The doctor paused, as he was having a hard time swallowing the situation. Calming down some, and gaining some of his lost composure, he looked at Isseixharem. Just how powerful is this kid? Isseixharem sighed and looked at the doctor, knowing this would eventually be asked. I have no idea, he answered truthfully, as he had no way of properly measuring his power, other than the immense pressure he and the others felt for that split second earlier. The mouse looked at the doctors, looking for answers as to when he would wake up again, while the doctors did the same, looking at the mouse as to how could something like this happen. All this was conveyed over a veil of silence, until one of the doctors relented and sighed. We will inform you if he wakes up or his condition changes. Thank you. Not a second after Isseixharem nodded and expressed his thanks, Serafal broke her silence, asking, it wouldn't be too much trouble if I stayed and watched over him, would it? The doctors, knowing it was more of a statement than a question, dared not disagree unless they wanted to face the wrath of the childish Mao. Of course, just don't do anything rash. Before Serafal could say her thanks, the doctors were already out the door and down the hallway. I don't even get any respect in my own hospital, Serafal frowned as she watched the hospital personnel disperse. I guess I shall take my leave, Ajuka stated as he prepared a magical circle. Serafal was over at the window, looking in a tear building in her eye. Isseixharem could see her starting to cry in the window's reflection, but was interrupted when Ajuka tapped on his shoulder. Are you coming back to the office? He pointed at the magic circle that was hovering just off the ground. Yes, Grafia has already requested my presence, he said, then turning to Serafal, you will continue to keep us in the loop, yes? Not even bothering to look at him, she simply raised her hand in acknowledgement, while she continued to peer through the glass at the boy's sleeping form. She heard the teleportation magic finish, which meant she was the only one left, aside from the occasional hospital staff that walked the corridors. She made sure no one was looking, then without notice or reason, she took one tearful look at the teen and slipped into his room to get a closer look. Issei's mindscape. Issei couldn't really describe anything that was happening around him. He knew this wasn't real. The walls of red and orange flames that gave off a cozy warmth couldn't exist. The ruby-scaled dragon that towered above him was another clue that this couldn't exist, but here he was staring at the beast, as it seemed to search him with those intense emerald eyes. Neither side broke the silence, the dragon that stared at his frightened partner, or the teen who was staring at something from a fantasy novel. One accepting the situation, the other awestruck at the very thought. "I don't expect you to understand," Drake began as smoke leaked from his snout. "I do at least expect for you and me to communicate." Issei fell to his knee, as the voice of the dragon seemed to overpower his thoughts. "Before I go any further, there are 2 questions I must ask." Drake spoke as he lowered his volume, so his partner could understand clearly as to how significant this was. "First, are you willing to work with me?" Looking up from his kneeling form, Issei stared at the dragon as he contemplated the question, but he wasn't really thinking of the question. Instead, he acted out of fear, and with it at the front of his mind he spoke, "What will happen to me?" Drake was expecting this question, but it still hurt him to some degree. Knowing the boy's past was enough to see how he frightened the boy. But he would never hurt his host. So Drake answered truthfully. "I don't know," he said as the fear on Issei's face became more prominent. "But, I do know that everything you fear would soon fear you." It always came down to fear. What he feared, what scared him and what was least likely, was for him to be feared. Issei paused as the offer hung in the air, the idea danced in his head like fire. "Do I want to be feared?" He thought as he remembered all the times he himself was afraid of someone or something, the whip as it tore into his flesh or the laugh of the person wielding it. "I do not want to be feared," he spoke with only a slight tremble, "but I don't want to be scared anymore." Bragg hummed in response. He figured this was as good of an answer he was going to get. "Alright then, the other question I will ask, but you do not have to answer." He spoke as the dragon crouched down low in order to be face to face with Issei. "What is it you want most?" Issei was at first afraid when the dragon suddenly took up the entirety of his vision, but was more surprised at the question the fire breather asked. It had been a long time since anyone ever asked or cared about what he wanted, so he hadn't given it much thought. The silence continued on as Issei thought while Drake stayed crouched, his nose just inches from Issei's chest. The only sign of movement was the light smoke that trickled from Drake's nostrils as he exhaled, until Issei stopped frowning, and his expression became almost blank, because for once Issei had an honest thought, one without purpose or that was directed by fear and emotion. So he answered truthfully, "I don't know." Hospital room. Serafal was hunched over Issei as he slept, inches from his face, like a prince, before he kissed the princess. She tried to get a bit closer to examine his scar, as his face and body were covered in them, but she tripped over one of the tubes that were attached to his arm. I'm so sorry." Serafal started apologizing as she heard him groan. She had just looked up to see his eyes still shut. If it wasn't for his head shuddering, and the tremors she could feel through the blankets, she would have thought he was peacefully dreaming. "Please no more." Serafal's mood changes instantly. While she knew there was little she could do about the past, she could help the boy in the here and now. Getting off his shaky form and taking one more look, which was all she needed to convince herself this was for his own good. Whispering a soft "I'm sorry" and taking a step back, she held her breath and with gentle firmness, she slapped him. Issei was now very much awake. He let his eyes adjust before he moved his head in the direction of the hand that was receding past his vision. Turning his head, he saw the same girl from earlier looking at him with concern. "How are you feeling?" Serafal asked as she was worried that she might have hurt the boy more than the nightmare he was remembering. Issei wasn't sure if he should respond or not. The girl had just slapped him when he was sleeping. He had only been slapped for doing something disrespectful. How was sleeping disrespectful? "She did it so you wouldn't have to endure your nightmare." Drake roused himself, worried his partner might get the wrong meaning for her actions. Serafal could see he relaxed some, but she stayed silent as he collected himself. She moved back from the bed toward the line of chairs against the wall. She could feel his eyes on her the entire time as if waiting for a command. "These clothes here," she pointed to the set of jeans and a plain blue t-shirt, resting on a chair, "are for you. Knock on the door when you're finished changing." She finished and let down the blinds. She had one foot out the door when she froze. "Why?" Choking on her words as she heard how rough his voice had become, she turned and explained it to him. "I have been stuck in this hospital watching you for days now, so we are going to get some fresh air." Smiling at the last bit, she skipped out the door and shut it behind her. Issei was finally alone now. He unhooked the various tubes and patches from himself and swung his feet over to one side of his bed. He sat there for a little bit, looking at his toes wiggling in the air, his ankles unrestrained, and he himself free to move as he pleased. Freedom was something Issei had only dreamed of, and now he was experiencing it. There was little he could do to contain his emotions, so he cried. Serafal heard the sobs and swiftly moved out of the chair next to the door, opening it only to find Issei staring at her, with what she could only guess was his weak attempt at happiness. Embarrassed about her action, she apologized and shut the door. "She is truly concerned for your well-being," Drake said as Issei was still startled by the woman's sudden appearance. Ignoring the woman's actions, Issei went back to looking at his feet and then shuffled himself off the bed, standing up. The cold laminate floor of the hospital was enough for Issei to dismiss the thought of this being some twisted dream. Moving to the chair, he tried to think of the last time he was in a hospital and couldn't but settle on the idea that he had to have come here with his parents at least once. Changing out of his gown, he looked at the clothes and paused. What is it now? Drake questioned as the constant interruptions were starting to get to him. He understood that this was going to take time, but the boy's lack of effort was pathetic. I understand that this is hard, but get over yourself, else nothing will change. Issei flinched at Drake's verbal tongue lashing. He couldn't understand why the dragon was so angry. It was his past that tormented him. He didn't ask for someone to live through it with him, especially if it was unwillingly. Why are you so angry? Issei asked. He needed to understand. I never asked for you to partner with me or have to face my problems with me. His anger started to creep into his voice as he remembered memory after painful memory. Still looking at the clothes laid out for him, he closed his eyes and inwardly spoke, just leave, it would be better if I drown in this fate alone. Brage was silent, never had a host refused him so completely. He could feel the pain the boy felt, every little amount of fear that made his body shiver, but the certainty this boy felt about his words was undeniable. Drake had not felt pain since he lost his body, but this boy had struck a nerve. It doesn't work like that, I cannot just be wished away. Drake roared inside Issei's head. Never have I been stuck in a host, so loathing of himself that he fails to realize the gift that has been presented before him. Drake couldn't contain his fury anymore. The boy was his partner, and he couldn't bear to be seen as weak. Calming down some, he continued. I am stuck with you just as you are stuck with me. Get a hold of yourself before the White One presents himself. Issei could feel Drake's presence retreat from his mind, and Beast's roaring had driven him to his knees and given him a supernatural headache. Standing up, Issei was thinking over something the dragon had said. The gift that has been presented to me. Issei first thought the dragon was referring to himself, but maybe not. Issei stopped staring at the clothes and walked towards the room's window, looking through and seeing the lively street below. Mumbling to himself, am I free? He walked back to the chair and quickly got dressed. Serafal was starting to become impatient. It didn't take this long to change into a pair of pants and a shirt, but what was she going to do? She couldn't scold him for changing into the first set of clean clothes he has had in who knows how long. If he doesn't hurry up, I'm going to drag him out of here naked. Serafal pouted as she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She started to get out of her seat when the door clicked open, revealing a completely dressed, emotionless 16-year-old boy. Serafal looked over at him with no small amount of pity. The boy's scars were visible even with proper clothing. There was simply no way to cover up what had happened to him. But she had to admit, if it wasn't for the wicked scar across his right eye, he was easy on the eyes, with his rough brown hair and empty brown eyes. If he had any emotion left, he might be a fun person to tease. Ready to go? Serafal asked as she looked him over once more, waiting for some kind of answer. Issei, not really having much choice in the matter, bowed his head and followed the woman. The elevator was closing behind him when a doctor rounded the corner and saw them leaving. Who discharged him? He practically screamed in the hall. Serafal just smiled as the door fully closed and the elevator began its descent. Serafal was excited, but cautious all the same. Here was a boy with untold potential, with power that was unchecked, and he was a complete wreck. So she started off simple. It has been a while since you last ate, huh? Serafal asked as she stepped out of the elevator in front of him, knowing that he would follow closely behind. She stopped in her tracks as it only just crossed her mind. I don't even know what your name is. She realized as she whirled around facing the emotionless teen. Would you please tell me? Asking as innocently as she could, without sounding overly curious. Sighing, Issei croaked his name. Issei, well alright Issei, what would you like to have for lunch? Serafal asked as she turned around again and headed towards the hospital's exit, with Issei in tow. The silence was starting to annoy her, and the fact that Issei hadn't touched his food. She knew they gave him fluids at the hospital, but they left before any meal, so why was he not eating? Serafal didn't expect him to order food. She had only ever heard him speak 2 words, and one of them was his name, which she was happy to know he hadn't forgotten, because it seemed that everything else that accompanied a name, emotion, feeling, personality, was non-existent. So as a compromise, she ordered the same bento box for both of them. She was about to ask why he was staring at her so intently, as if waiting for something. A question seemed to linger in the air, but she couldn't figure out if it was hers or his. Then it dawned on her, he probably hadn't been allowed to eat freely. She took a guess and froze as a result. It's okay Issei, you can eat, she spoke, looking at him with no small amount of remorse. It hurt her when she watched him pick up the chopsticks and eat the now almost cold food. Serafal couldn't stop looking at him now. She had basically commanded him to eat. That's when it hit her. No, there's no way he could think like this, she thought as the idea became more and more plausible the more she thought about it. Hoping she was wrong, she asked a question she had never asked to anyone other than a select few. Asking as calmly and as carefully as she could, she asked Issei, "Who am I to you?" Looking up from his bento, he looked quizzically at her in confusion. So he answered as he always had. "Mistress." Seraphol took a deep breath as her fears turned into truth. He thought she owned him. No, this was not something she had planned. She wanted him to follow her because he wanted to, not because she forced him into doing so. She had to set things straight. "Listen, Issei, do you understand that you are free?" She started, not really looking for an answer because she most likely wasn't going to get one, but more to get the point across. "You can go where you want, do what you want, you are not controlled anymore." Issei just stared at her. Was he really free? No more orders or beatings or servitude. "You idiot, what did you think she was doing?" Drake piped up internally, unable to contain his frustration about his partner's lack of understanding. "Everything she has done has been for your benefit, not because she had something to gain from it." Before he went silent once again, he mentally whispered idiot. He didn't know where to begin, so he bowed his head in silence to Seraphol and continued eating what was left of lunch. It had been a while since he'd eaten. Surzich's office. "No, Juka, that's absurd." Surzich shouted back at his friend, who was still calm and sitting back in his chair. "That boy has been through hell, and you want to put him in a peerage. Yes, he is powerful, but not even he realizes it. He is naive to the world he has been thrust into." "Yes, and while that is all true, you didn't let me finish." Ajuka spoke up. He was being reasonable. This was a delicate situation after all. "I said he should join someone's peerage, but you didn't let me give you my suggestions." Ajuka finished, knowing that Surzich's concern was valid, yet misplaced. "Go on." "Well, he is pretty young, so what if we put him in one of the young devil peerages, your sister's even?" Ajuka said with no small amount of satisfaction. He knew his friend's weak spots too well, and he definitely had a soft spot when it came to her. "I will think about it," Surzich slowly answered as he thought about the idea. It wasn't actually that bad. With the boy close to Ria's, he could watch over him and intervene if necessary. But he still had a feeling they were rushing things. They had little idea about this boy's history and what he would do if he was told to serve under a king. Surzich thought about the possibility silently while Ajuka sat across from him, analyzing him as he did everything else. There were a few outcomes that he saw. One of the more positive of the two is that he could become very loyal to whomever it was he was serving, while the other possibility was why he was still thinking on the issue. What if the boy was sick of being controlled and manipulated? Since he was a free piece under no authority, he was outside the system. Normally it would have been fine if he went rogue and became a stray devil, but he had 8 mutation pawn pieces residing in him. He was powerful and wouldn't be easy to remove if that's what it came to. Above all, feared that if he went rogue, he would possibly kill his master, and if his master was Ria's or any other young devil, Surzich couldn't live with himself if that happened. The Nekomata was one thing, she was docile and would work with people. This boy. He was a mystery. "I will give you my final answer tomorrow," Surzich said as he looked up at his gently smiling friend. Ajuka got up to leave, but stopped with his hand on the door and looked back. "You already have made it, my friend," he said before he finally left the room. Surzich sighed as he leaned back into the office chair. Looking up at the ceiling, he thought about everything that had happened recently, releasing. Yes, he had already made. Seraphol was skipping down the street back to the hospital, Issei in tow, until a magic circle appeared a few feet in front of her. "Graphia, I am busy right now," Seraphol pouted as she crossed her arms, taking the stance of a rather annoyed child. "The hospital informed me of the boy's absence," Graphia said with elegance as the rest of her form appeared through the magic circle. "They also said that you coerced him to leave." "Well, I was sick of sitting in a chair, waiting for Seraphol to cry," as she turned around looking at Issei's blank face. "Besides, I thought it would be good for him to see the world. It has been so long since he has seen anything really," she thought, wondering just what all he had endured inducing such a state. "Surzich hasn't deemed it safe for him to be released. I kindly ask you to return him to the hospital. He isn't one of Ajuka's science experiments, he is a person," Seraphol yelled at, scaring some of the devils around them, making them stop. "You're making a scene," where Graphia spoke, as she calmly raised her hand, enveloping the 3 of them in a magic circle. "How do you think he would react to having another female master?" Surzich asked as she spoke to the projection of Ajuka. "Not sure," Ajuka smirked as he had heard about his fellow Mayu having lunch with a silent boy. "Why don't you ask Seraphol?" Surzich's face froze. "What do you mean?" "Hutcher." Surzich widened his eyes as he saw who appeared in his office. "Graphia, what is the meaning of this?" He paused as he saw Seraphol and the boy behind her. "Why are both of you here? You're supposed to be watching over him." Surzich cried, clearly frustrated about having been interrupted. "I was just not in the hospital," Seraphol said as if that made everything okay. "That boy, smack, he has a name," Seraphol said as she slowly pulled her hand away from Surzich's now very red cheek. Graphia couldn't react. By the time her hand was out, Seraphol's was just pulling away. "And what would that be?" Surzich said, speaking through gritted teeth as he caressed his cheek. Issei, his name is Issei. Are you willing to speak to us now, Issei? Surziches asked using his name in an attempt to appear friendly. Though he only replied with the boy's unchanging emotionless face. He only told me his name, so I doubt he is ready for open conversation. Looking towards Grafia, Surziches spoke, leave us. With a quick bow, she was gone. Turning his head to Serafal, you too, I wish to speak with Issei alone. Knowing his tone was not to be ignored, she prepared a circle, meanwhile she spoke, crossing her arms as she teleported away. This was the first time Surziches was alone with the boy, signaling he began well. I'm sorry about all that, normally we conduct ourselves in a much more civilized manner. Though I guess your appearance isn't exactly something one would call normal, is it? Surziches slightly frowned, getting him to open up was going to be hard, so he figured he would start with the facts. How much do you know about your situation? He asked, curious to see if the teen understood his surroundings, but more to see if he could get a response. Something, anything that would signal he wasn't an empty shell. Again silence. Is there anything you are willing to talk about? Surziches asked, though he was mostly speaking to himself. Yes. Well, that's great. He paused, realizing Issei just spoke. The sandpaper in the boy's voice made him choke on his words some. What do you want to talk about then? Surziches rushed, hoping he could keep Issei talking. Issei was terrified, it had been so long since he had spoken with someone. Drake had helped some, but he was scared of him too, after all, he was a dragon. So Issei thought it over slowly, it took everything he had left to open his mouth again, what came out of it wasn't really him speaking. Earlier, I can speak on your behalf if you would like. Drake said as he watched from Issei's mind how difficult it was for him to speak. Drake watched him sit at a table with food in front of him, and his partner was doing nothing, absolutely nothing. The woman named Serafal kept asking questions, while his partner stared back blankly, unacceptable. If you don't start voicing your thoughts, others will take advantage, and I will not be quiet. No, it's not that I can't speak, it's that I am afraid, Issei replied. He didn't understand why he was even talking to Drake. The dragon had revealed himself at the same time as the woman in front of him, it was all so sudden. Normally Issei didn't think it wasn't required for the past few years, so his mind eventually became empty. But now. He was forced to speak, for reasons unknown to him. What if I provide the words? Dryag mentioned that he was trying to come up with some way for the two of them to communicate with others. What do you mean? Issei wondered, still caught up in his own mess of thoughts. I simply provide you with what to say, Drake roared, hoping this would start his partner's return to normalcy. He knew that there were some things that would never return to normal. I don't know if I can. Issei began, but was cut off by an agitated beast. Would you quit? I am giving you sorely needed help, take it and be grateful. But what if you do not speak for you as soon, I will. Drake had had enough, there was only so much babying he could do. You may not be glad, I tend to be overbearing, think it over. I had enough of this pointless squabbling. Present, now what? Issei panicked as he had no idea what he was doing. You're the one who chose to only now speak, I can't create false wishes. Only you know what it is you truly want, Dryag said, this was not his problem. Surziches sat patiently hoping the boy would say something soon. He was starting to think he imagined it until the teen's coarse voice was heard again. What's going to happen to me? Of all the questions Issei could have asked, why did it have to be one that he couldn't answer? Well, there are a few things that could happen, Surziches started, worried about how this might end up. You understand that you are a devil, yes? Surziches asked, receiving a quick nod of the head. Do you understand everything that comes along with being a devil? Surziches waited for a response but got none, well at least he was communicating, sort of. Surziches really wanted to know how much the teen was kept in the dark, the supernatural was vast, he could get easily lost with little understanding. Sighing, Surziches decided it would be best if he started from the beginning, it might help him out some. Plus he could see Issei shiver some with each coming question. Why don't you take a seat? Surziches left his chair and helped Issei into an armchair in the corner. As he reached out to Issei, he could see Issei flinch, so he redirected his hand in the direction of the chair. This is going to take some time, Surziches thought as he moved to the center of the room and started telling the history of the devils, along with the other great powers. And you probably don't want to hear the story for the millionth time. Grafia looked at the mess before her, the torn sheets, shards of a vase that was obviously thrown against the wall. But the biggest mess was curled up in a corner, terrified of her own shadow. Are you willing to speak, or should I come back another time? She asked the curled up girl. Damn you, Grafia was just about to leave when she heard the little rat speak. It doesn't feel good, Grafia spoke low, hoping to scare the girl into confessing. In the girl's last show of courage, she looked up, those green eyes attempting to poison anything that gazed in too deep. Chloe Leviathan, you have committed a crime worthy of death. What that boy has been through will always weigh on your soul, whether you like it or not, Grafia said, as she renewed the curse that she had placed on the girl when she first woke up. She almost felt bad for the girl, her black hair clearly needed work, as did the rest of herself. The clean set of clothes that were provided for her were now almost as ragged as her breathing. The only thing that didn't seem off in her appearance was her eyes, that still showed her unbroken will. "I will be back tomorrow, for your sake, I hope you are willing to speak with us." Grafia spoke in her usual elegance as she closed the door. She was never happy about going to an extreme, but for this girl she would make an exception, she thought, walking down the hall as the screaming started. Issei sat emotionless in the armchair as Isseixharem was finishing up his recount of the devil's history. So Isseixharem finished, taking a breath. "What do you need help on?" he said, knowing his explanation raised more questions than it explained. Teacher was not in the job description, Isseixharem thought, smiling. What Issei, who couldn't keep up, froze as the presentation was over. How is anyone supposed to remember all this? ... Relax, if you ever forget, I will help you out, Drake said, trying to help his partner in any way that he could. Besides, it's not like you're trying to remember the entire dragon pedigree. Issei didn't want to ask about what a dragon pedigree was, lest his mind get lost in that world too. But he did listen to the part about peerages, currently, that was bugging him to no end. Where do I belong was all he said, hoping Isseixharem could decipher the many questions that phrase held. Isseixharem was happy about the question but concerned with its contents. He expected to re-explain peerages to him, but it was the slight anger in the boy's voice that made him choose his words carefully, though he should have expected as much. Well, as of right now ... you don't belong anywhere. Isseixharem paused as he didn't really know any way to explain it without possibly enraging Issei. Ajuka could explain it better, but basically you are outside the system, so to speak. All Issei heard was freedom, but the look on Isseixharem's face stripped him of any other pleasant thoughts along that hopeful existence. You have power, Issei, Isseixharem said, trying to direct the conversation into more neutral territory. The evil pieces that reincarnated you were by no means normal, mutation pieces were used for your reincarnation. This surprised Issei. Isseixharem had glossed over peerages, but he went into great detail about the evil piece system and talked about how each piece differed in strength and of course about mutation pieces. Pieces? Issei asked, still amazed by the revelation. Yes, whoever revived you used 8 mutation pawn pieces. Your power is really something Isseixharem was happy with. Issei was surprised, well, it didn't show on his face. He could hear it in his voice, not much, but it was a start. Which reminds me, how could you have taken so many pieces? Isseixharem asked. It was time for some answers. There were some things that had to be known before he officially made up his mind. Before Issei could respond, Drake had revealed himself, with a circle of green light on Issei's left hand. That would be because of me, thank you for taking care of my host so completely, Drake spoke over the now silent Isseixharem. I am Drake, Welsh Dragon Emperor, I currently reside within Issei's sacred gear. Well, this is a pleasant surprise, I never expected it to be the boosted gear, though I guess it is fitting. Isseixharem pondered as he thought more about his upcoming decision. HMF, I wonder if Shalba knew what kind of power he had at his disposal. ... Now that introductions are out of the way, could you please answer the boy's previous question? I for one would like to know what is to happen to us as well. Perhaps Isseixharem internally panicked, a boy with 8 mutation pawn pieces he could handle, but the legendary boosted gear, it would cause a mess. Well, that's a tricky question, which is why I wanted to explain everything beforehand. Taking a breath, you have to join a peerage, else the old nobles would become upset and cause problems, so I was hoping you could join my sister's peerage. Grafia was walking past the other maids stationed in the courtyard, waiting for the train to come to a stop. This was one of the few things she looked forward to. The household became somewhat snooty in the girl's absence. Riaz brought a much-needed change of scenery. As the train slowly came to a stop, she could already see Riaz standing behind the door. How was the trip, Milady? The same, how have you been, Grafia? Riaz spoke as she moved out of the doorway, letting those in her peerage exit behind her. We have had some unusual events the past couple of days, Milady, Grafia mentioned, thinking about Issei's sudden arrival. I'm sure your brother will fill you in. Turning to the other members, she addressed them as well. Welcome back those in the service of Riaz Gremory. Oh, it's so good to be back, Grafia, been a while, hasn't it? A girl with long black hair rolled in a ponytail said as she bowed towards Grafia. Returning the bow, Grafia looked up. Thank you, Akeno. What about you, Kiba, Kaneko, have you been well? It's always nice to return to family, the blonde-haired man spoke as he bowed in greeting. It's cool, the little white-haired girl spoke with little expression, but Grafia could hear the sincerity of her words. Funny, she sounds almost like Issei, but with more ... life, Grafia thought as she returned Kaneko's bow. Now if you would follow me. As they walked in the direction of the Gremory mansion, servants bowed or clapped, welcoming Ria's return. The silence was killing him. Isseixharem had no idea what the outcome was going to be. He was hoping for the best, since he wasn't really prepared for the worst or any other outcome for that matter. It was only silent for him though. He knew there must have been one hell of a conversation happening internally between Dragon and Teen. No, absolutely not, I have had enough of being controlled, Issei stated as painful memories were on the brink of flooding to the front of his mind. I'm not saying to be controlled. If it is his sister, she can't be that much different than he is. Drake reasoned, hoping this would be a help to his partner. I understand that you are afraid of what could happen, but open your eyes, this could be of great help to you. Fine, but if they do anything even remotely similar, I myself will bathe them in dragon fire, Drake said, hoping to speak before the boy changed his mind. Do you want to ask her, shall I? Go ahead. Drake could hear the dissatisfaction in his partner's voice. He was hoping this would help, rather than hurt their minimal trust. We agree, though if anything happens to my partner at all that resembles what he has been through, the underworld will be soaked with the blood of those who wronged him. Issei was startled by the sudden outburst, he almost fell out of his chair. He had barely closed his eyes when Drake had roared their promise. Well, then it's settled then, Issei yawned looking at the dark purple sky from across the room. Why don't we resume this chat in the morning, he said, lifting his hand up, a magic circle forming beneath it. Issei stared at Issei, not really sure what was supposed to happen until he noticed Issei hadn't left yet, even though he was well inside the perimeter of the circle. Are you coming or are you going to sleep in a chair? Cautiously Issei stepped into the circle, this being the first time he had willingly done so. Issei smiled, and before Issei realized it they were enveloped in red light. Issei was expressionless, well he almost always was, but for once it was in both his physical appearance and his mental state. The building before him could hardly be considered a mansion, it was enormous. How many people live here, I wonder? As the two walked up to the door, it opened from the inside, revealing a slim man in rather formal clothes. Issei could only guess this was a butler. Appa. Issei's attention was redirected from the man holding the door to a young kid currently running into the arms of Issei. Ah, Milikus, I thought you would be in bed by now, what are you doing up so late? Issei asked as he opened his arms and lifted the child up to his face. I always wait for you, you have to say goodnight. The short red-haired boy smiled as his father gently set him on the ground. Where are your manners, Milikus? Please introduce yourself, Issei urged as he turned to face Issei. My name is Milikus Gremory, it's nice to meet you, Milikus politely spoke, finishing with a bow. This is Issei, he is going to be staying with us for the time being, try not to bother him too much, okay? Issei hoped this wasn't going to cause too many problems, he could only imagine how difficult it must be to reintegrate with people, especially if people were what caused you so much pain. Issei was hurting, and he didn't know why, was it the affection Milikus showed for his father or something else? Issei was swimming in confusion. Here, let me help you, Drake's voice almost sounded soothing as Issei let himself be dragged back into his past. Issei didn't know what he was watching until he heard a voice that he thought he would never hear again. So how was the trip, did you catch any fish for dinner? A woman, wearing an apron with nicely kept brown hair asked from the kitchen. Mom? Sadly I didn't, but our little boy here might grow up to be a fisherman, the man said as he placed a tackle box on the floor, along with the rest of the fishing equipment. Dad. Look, Mommy, I caught 2 fish. A little boy with brown hair and matching brown eyes ran into the kitchen, only to throw the 2 fish on the counter in front of his mother. Why can't I remember this, Issei thought as he stared at the scene playing out before him. This is from your past, I thought it might help you sort out everything you're feeling. Drake quietly mentioned as he was also viewing the memory. Now Issei, that's sweet honey, but you know what happens with fish, his mother said as she pointed the knife she was currently wielding in the direction of the sink. The younger Issei nodded and removed the fish from the counter. Then the image started to disappear, and Issei started to panic, he hadn't seen them in so long, why did they have to leave so soon? Issei and the young one are starting to become suspicious, Drake said as he urged Issei to return from the memory. Bring them back. Issei, they are in the past, you need to start looking forward, this is your life, I will not help my host dwell on things that can never be. And those are my memories, Issei internally screamed, letting just a wink of his power trickle out only to be sensed by Issei, who was starting to rethink the offer of Issei staying at his house. Issei, calm down, Issei said, becoming fully alert, hoping he could calm Issei down before things got out of hand, but the trickle of power was only increasing. Issei was about to put the boy to sleep when the oddest thing happened, Issei collapsed to the floor. He and Milikus tried to catch him before he fell to the floor completely, but were caught off guard by the sudden turn of events. What's wrong with him? Milikus asked, thinking it strange for someone to randomly fall unconscious. Well, Issei has been through some tough situations that hurt his body and mind, Issei replied. He wasn't trying to scare his son, he just wanted him to understand. Is that why he has a scar on his face? Milikus asked, though he quickly noticed scars on his limbs as well. Graphia, would you please prepare a room in the southern hall, thank you, Issei asked as the magic circle beside his ear faded away. Yeah, that's part of it. Issei replied, though he was mostly talking to himself. Milikus, I will tuck you in after I get Issei squared away, and if I don't, then your mother will, okay? Okay, the boy said sadly, hoping he could spend some time with his father. But he got up and left his father to deal with the still sleeping guest. As soon as he knew his son was out of sight, Isseixharem teleported Issei and himself to the room Grafia had readied for him. So what happened to Grafia as she knelt down to look at the teen's breathing? This would be my bad, Drake spoke as a green light appeared from Issei's hand. The boosted gear. Grafia spoke, unable to contain her surprise. What exactly did you to talk about, if I may ask? Isseixharem asked, hoping he could glean some answers from the dragon, since he had gotten almost nothing from Issei. Issei has not had it easy, even you two realize that, but my partner is. Drake paused, not knowing the right words, to sum up Issei's condition. He is confused and frankly doesn't understand emotions, he feels them, but only in significant amounts, if that makes sense. Both Isseixharem and Grafia understood it now, this boy wasn't emotionless, he was packed with emotion, yet had no idea how to express any of them. He needs rest, my partners behave, I thank you for everything you have done for him. One of these days he will thank you as I have. After Isseixharem and Grafia moved Issei to the bed, Isseixharem bid Drake a good night and shut the door, only to come face to face with a stone-faced Grafia. What is he doing here? Perhaps Isseixharem didn't think how anyone else would react to him housing Issei. Well I didn't think he should go back to the hospital so. So you thought you would be a good host and let him stay here. Grafia was disappointed, you know your sister arrived today, did you even think about her safety? This shocked the Isseixharem, Riaz wasn't supposed to show up for at least a few more days. Well, that's a pleasant surprise, may I ask why she is so early? You forgot, didn't you? Grafia was livid now, it's bad enough that I have to force you to do paperwork, but now I have to be your timekeeper as well. Sheesh, she is going to be pissed when I tell her I didn't tuck Milikus in. I am sorry Grafia, it's just for the night I promise, he needs to be looked after, okay? He had just turned around, hoping he could escape the fury of his wife, when Grafia asked a final question. Did you say goodnight to Milikus? Am so close, Isseixharem thought as he pondered lying to his wife. Sorry oh no, you don't get to get out of this one, she said as she grabbed Isseixharem by the ear, just like a child, and dragged him to Milikus's room. It's bad enough he doesn't get to see you that often, the least you could do is wish him a good night. Isseixharem cried as he was dragged down the hall. Riaz awoke with someone knocking at her door, normally she would have ignored it, but the voice behind the knocking said otherwise. Good morning Milady, Isseixharem has something important to discuss with you over breakfast. Brother dearest, only he would want to meet this early she thought, rolling out of bed. Wrapping the sheet around her, she walked to the door, contemplating the idea of just going back to sleep. Morning to you too Grafia, what does brother want to talk about? She asked, still holding the sheets that covered her nude form. That is between you and him, Grafia bowed and began to walk away, but decided there was more to be said. Riaz, it is not a wise idea to show off so much skin, the heiress to the house of Gremory should have common decency. You know I can't sleep with clothes on. Riaz replied knowing full well she was in the wrong. The look Grafia gave her left no room for argument though, so she shut the door and began her morning routine. Isseixharem was becoming impatient, he understood that she only just arrived, but this was just too important. I doubt she understands though. She will, he thought as he smiled, thanking the servant who took his breakfast platter away. So, Riaz said as she rounded the corner, facing her brother as he sat on a chair, overlooking the garden from the balcony. What is so world-ending that the Mau summons his sister in such a hasty manner? Sleeping Beauty wakes, come sit, eat and listen, Isseixharem teased as he motioned for her to join him. First a couple of questions, you haven't used any of your pawn pieces have you? Isseixharem asked, leaning in so only Riaz could hear. No, why she answered curious as to where this early morning conversation was headed. Good, there is someone who I think could be quite beneficial to you, however, this person comes with some issues. It's time to wake up, partner Drake exclaimed, he could feel the difference in the air, and the anticipation was nagging him. Not as much as his unenthusiastic partner, who was resisting his motivation. If you don't get up I'm taking over, and I may or may not relinquish control once I'm exhausted. Drake finally said after he was still receiving the cold shoulder. He knew his partner was awake, he could feel the anger and rage that usually accompanied his thoughts, though they seemed more distant, almost faded in a sense. Issei hadn't spoken to him since he forcefully knocked him out. I thought you trusted me, are we not hosts in spirit? You lost that privilege, Issei mumbled. With every word the dragon spoke he was only becoming increasingly agitated. With no way to release all the pent-up feelings, Drake got the full ferociousness of Issei's icy thoughts. Those were my memories, you had no right. Leave what's left of me alone, he screamed, letting all his internal barriers down. You were the one that wanted someone to talk to, you wanted to help, well here you go. Issei paused, collecting himself before he continued his verbal onslaught. Drake took the chance to try and calm his partner down before Issei did something he would regret. you know Silence, I wasn't done. Greg was shaken, that was the first time he had heard Issei command someone to do something. He couldn't help but notice the sinister undertone that lashed out like a whip as the words stung Greg. He wasn't sure where this part of his partner came from, but was sure he preferred the quieter Issei to this one. You said I should leave the past in the past, right? Well, sorry, the past is what defines someone, it's what created the very consciousness you share with this body, so you know what I'm letting go. You do everything, you make your point. The anger in his voice had long since been replaced with heavy sadness. You didn't seem to have a problem toying with my head last night. Greg was at a loss for what to do. On one claw he wanted to verbally smack the kid for disrespecting him at such a high level, but on the other, this kid had been through hell, and while he had been around longer than most races, Issei was a first for him. I am sorry, I shall leave you to your thoughts. Greg quietly took his leave, not knowing if anything he said would help or possibly make the situation worse. Issei relaxed some, feeling Greg's retreating consciousness. His mind was in a jumble, right and wrong were debatable, so he didn't try and fight it, he just let his mind wander. Hoping his thoughts would carry him away from this unpleasant feeling starting to well up on the edge of his mind. He didn't drift too far till a knock on the door forced him to organize his thoughts somewhat. As he slugged over towards the door, opening it only to find the silver-haired maid looking at him, he could tell she was being cautious, but the smile on her face made him think twice about his previous assessment. Isseixharem would like to see you, there are a few people he would like to introduce you to, Grafia said as she tried to read Issei, wondering what all was going on inside his head. The fact that he showed no emotion, and his brown eyes seemed not only distant but slightly dimmer than they should be, made it impossible for her to gain any insight as to what he was thinking. I shall wait for you out here. Issei wondered what she meant when he remembered the new set of clothes that were laid out at the foot of the bed. Shutting the door he turned and faced the bathroom, gritting his teeth, he tried to think about all the pain-filled memories that accompanied a bathing room. Grafia knew the boy needed some space, but Isseixharem couldn't wait forever, nor could Ria's for that matter. She knew she shouldn't but she did anyway. Issei, are you okay? She asked, then listened for some sign of life. The shower had been off for some time now, so she assumed he had already gotten dressed and was sitting on the bed. She wished that was the case when she opened the door to find Issei hurriedly putting on his clothes. She didn't know what to think, she had been told he had been heavily scarred, his face was proof enough of that, but this boy's back resembled a chopping block. He was faced away from her so she didn't see his chest, but she feared it might look similar. In her shock, she failed to notice he was shivering, and the barely audible sorry he repeated as the situation flipped something in his mind, turning him back to the submissive boy she helped rescue. As he finished putting his shirt on, Grafia watched him walk up to her and bow. When he had risen she looked into his now watery eyes and was able to read them clearly, these were full of fear. She took a breath and then refocused her thoughts, the scene before her had completely thrown her off. Are you ready? Looking at him for another wave of the hand, something. Issei blinked. Well, if you would follow me. Grafia was silent for the entire walk, though Issei didn't mind that he was still shaken from her entering his room. But he was more confused as to why he acted in the way he did. It was as if he watched the entire thing transpire as an observer. He was most definitely not in control. What happened? 1 second I'm looking over my body, and then next I'm watching me do something I never told myself to do. It was very confusing. He was tempted to ask the dragon, though he doubted Drake would be in a helpful mood. He needed to fix that. Issei was about to apologize when Grafia stopped and looked him over before opening the door, letting him walk through first. Issei first noticed Isseixharem standing in the center of the room, hands clasped behind him, smiling at Issei as he walked through the door. The next thing he noticed was the group of people standing off to the side as if waiting for a cue. Issei's first thought was to run, that was until his eyes landed on one of the devils standing in front of the group, a girl not that much older than himself, with long red hair. He started to back up, but the click of the door and the face of Grafia as he turned around prevented his exit. Crap, Issei, it's alright, I just wanted to introduce you to a few people. Isseixharem spoke, trying to fill the room with something other than tension. He moved to where Issei was rooted in place, and wrapping an arm around him, he forcefully moved Issei in the direction of his sister. Issei, this is Ria's Gremory, my sister. Isseixharem introduced her as he started to make his way behind the terrified boy. Issei defaulted, he lost control of his thoughts and did what seemed natural, he bowed. Oh Issei, what happened to you? Ria's thought as a tear fell from her cheek, landing on the ground before Issei. Thanks for watching this video. Part 2 is over. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support the VanishMagic for writing that awesome fanfic. See you in the next video. Goodbye.